So the United States government is doing exactly what your weird crypto-obsessed cousin did in 2021, and that is buying random companies' stock. They're also telling everyone it's part of a grand vision and pretending that it isn't really panicking. Except unlike your cousin, the US government can actually tank your portfolio and declare war in the same fiscal quarter. So what stocks is the US government buying? Why are they doing this? And why do they seem that they're becoming a lot more like China by the day? Well, let's start off here with Intel, the once mighty chip maker whose logo you've seen more often than your father's approval. Earlier this year, the US government converted about $11 billion in CHIPS Act grants into stock, giving itself roughly a 10% stake in Intel. This makes Washington one of Intel's largest shareholders, and if that sentence doesn't terrify you, you've clearly never seen Congress try to set up a printer. The official line is that this is about protecting America's semiconductor independence. The unofficial line is that they're sick of watching China crank out AI chips like their factory installing the future, while America's fab plants still look like Best Buys that lost their lease. So, the government now owns nearly 1/10 of a company responsible for the brains of every laptop, missile, and teenage gaming addiction in this country. And Intel's investors, well, they're panicking like someone just told them that the Treasury Department now gets to attend shareholder meetings. The company even warned that US ownership could damage global perception, which is corporate speak for China might stop buying our chips if we suddenly look like the Pentagon's Etsy shop. Meanwhile, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the guy who sounds like he sells mattresses on local television, that guy, he insisted that this wasn't nationalization. It was simply taxpayer return on investment, which sure sounds reasonable until you remember that return on investment is what every scam crypto exchange said right before disappearing into the Cayman Islands. But Intel is just one of the stocks that the US government has been buying. The next is MP Materials, the company digging up America's only major rare earth mine at Mountain Pass, California. The Pentagon just plunked down $400 million to become its biggest shareholder because apparently nothing says national security like buying into an open pit mine in the Mojave Desert. Rare earths, of course, are those exotic minerals used to make everything from fighter jet engines to the vibrating alert on your phone that reminds you how lonely you actually are in this life. Now, China controls more than 70% of the world's rare earth processing, which means if Beijing wanted to, they could just shut off the supply chain and make America's defense industry go from unstoppable global power to guys with some nice slingshots in essentially one day. So the US military solution is simple. Buy the mine. Because if there's one thing that the Defense Department loves more than aircraft carriers, it's pretending that it knows how to run a mining company. However, you can probably expect that the first government-issued drill bit is going to cost about $1.3 million and require a 3-year approval process. But another company they're buying is Lithium Americas, the proud owner of Nevada's Thacker Pass project. The kind of place that makes your Tesla possible and your groundwater flammable. The US government has been flirting with the company like a divorced dad texting his ex at 2 a.m. Lots of, let's talk about a small stake and we'll just see how this goes, all while waving around $2.26 billion in loans. Officials keep calling it a strategic partnership, which is the same phrase every failing startup uses before selling itself for scrap to Google. So why lithium? Why this company? Well, it's because China currently refines about 60% of the world's supply of lithium, and the US wants its own supply. In other words, Washington doesn't want to beg Beijing for batteries when it decides to build the next generation of drones, tanks, and, inevitably, self-aware vending machines. But this deal also tells you everything about how America handles green energy independence. Rather than just letting the private sector figure it out, the US is sending the federal government into the lithium trade. Now, the next company that they bought is US Steel, that beloved industrial relic your grandfather still thinks runs this country. Now, Japan's Nippon Steel bought this company for nearly $15 billion, but the US government inserted itself into the deal like an overprotective parent meeting a new boyfriend. Washington negotiated a golden share, meaning it gains a veto power over big decisions, it can appoint board members, and must approve anything from moving headquarters to changing the logo font. So yes, a foreign company technically owns this, but America is effectively holding the leash. Now, you can understand why the feds are obsessed with US Steel. It's about the national symbolism. Steel built America. It built bridges, railroads, and every major disaster movie plot. I mean, how many times do we need to see the Golden Gate Bridge get destroyed? But a major reason why we can is because of US Steel. So losing this company entirely to foreign control would have been like selling the Statue of Liberty to IKEA. So now Washington owns a chunk of this symbol, ensuring that if Japan ever gets any ideas, America can step in and say, no, you don't get to repaint the blast furnaces in anime colors. Now, the last company or companies that the US is proposing to buy, it's not done yet, well, they're defense contractors. There are loud hints that Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, or Raytheon could be the next on the government's strategic investment list. Because apparently the US has realized that giving companies trillions in contracts isn't enough, it wants to own part of them too. The justification is that if these firms are basically extensions of the Pentagon already, they might as well be formalized in that sort of way. And that's great news for Lockheed shareholders and terrible news for anyone who thinks government efficiency and fighter jet production should never appear in the same sentence. But what's the pattern here with all of these companies? Well, every one of these investments hits the same notes: tech, energy, minerals, or defense. Sectors where China's dominance could choke America's economy faster than TikTok can destroy a teenager's attention span. Now, the US isn't buying up random companies like GameStop for fun, it's targeting the infrastructure of the empire: chips, metals, batteries, and bombs. It's the economic equivalent of sharpening your sword because your neighbor just bought a tank. And yes, this whole operation looks suspiciously like something Beijing would do. The Chinese government has spent decades taking partial control of key companies under the banner of national rejuvenation. Now America is doing the same thing, only with more paperwork and worse slogans. We might be watching capitalism slowly get merged with state control, not through revolution, but through corporate filings and press releases read by guys who look like they run hedge funds out of doomsday bunkers. And it's sort of working, at least for now. I mean, the markets actually like it. Intel stock rose, MP Material stock doubled. Investors are realizing that having the US Treasury as a shareholder is like being in a gang with the world's largest military. You might not make fast profits, but nobody's messing with your turf, if you know what I mean. But the irony is that for decades, America accused others of propping up state-owned enterprises that distorted markets. Now it's doing the exact same thing while insisting it's a private-public partnership. America loves pretending that it's allergic to socialism, the same way your friend Chad swears he's not into commitment right before moving in with the girl that he met at a Coldplay concert. America loves the idea of pure capitalism until the moment something catches fire, metaphorically, economically, or literally. Then it sprints into the arms of the government like a toddler who saw a clown at a birthday party. But this is not new because the United States has a pretty long history of nationalizing industries. Every time the economy starts wheezing, the government steps in, takes control of major sectors, and then says, don't worry, it's just temporary. And temporary in Washington time is a flexible unit of measurement that ranges anywhere from 3 weeks to we still technically own Amtrak after 54 years. We'll get to that in a second, by the way. So, nationalizing industries in the US. Let's take you back. It's 1917. Woodrow Wilson is president, and the railroads, the literal arteries of the nation, are clogged with so much corporate inefficiency that trains were colliding like bumper cars run by Vanderbilt nephews. So the government said, fine, give me the keys. Wilson nationalized the entire US railroad network, creating the United States Railroad Administration, a fancy name for we're doing communism, but only until Germany loses. They standardized equipment, controlled prices, and made scheduling decisions for private companies. Now, this worked for a while. Then the war ended, and everyone suddenly remembered that they were capitalists once again. Congress passed the Transportation Act of 1920, returning control to the private sector, but as usual, the private sector immediately proved why it can't have nice things. The railroads collapsed again a few decades later, which led to round 2, Conrail. Now, in 1976, after the entire Northeastern rail system imploded financially, the government stitched the ruins together into a single national company called Consolidated Rail Corporation, or Conrail for short. And yes, this is correct, the United States nationalized railroads twice in 1 century. However, the government did other things. Fast forward to World War II, when the US went on an even bigger nationalization spree. Roosevelt basically took one look at America's wartime industries and said, yeah, these are mine now. So the government took over coal mines, railroads once again, and factories producing everything from airplanes to canned Spam. The logic was simple: if you can't get workers and management to cooperate, just seize the whole damn thing and call it patriotism. The most iconic moment came later, under Harry Truman, when in 1952 he nationalized the steel industry to stop a massive strike that threatened the Korean War effort. It was a bold move that ended in a glorious failure, though. The Supreme Court told Truman to sit down and stop LARPing as Stalin in the famous Youngstown Sheet and Tube Co. v. Sawyer case. But this attempt set a precedent. The president could, under the right conditions, take over private enterprise in the name of national security, which coincidentally is the exact same excuse every government uses before they start wearing matching armbands. But the piece de resistance of American temporary socialism came in the 1930s and the 1970s, when the government basically decided that if it can't regulate something properly, it'll just own it. Take the Tennessee Valley Authority, founded in 1933. FDR decided that rural America didn't have enough electricity, so he built a federally owned utility empire that controlled dams, rivers, and enough hydroelectric plants to power an Avengers movie budget. And that, well, it still exists today. A government-run megacorporation that basically tells Alabama what voltage its toasters run at. And yes, in Alabama, this is also referred to as the TVA. If you don't know, that is also known as the overseeing time controllers of the universe in the Marvel movies. Not spooky at all. Now, after all that came Amtrak, which we mentioned before. Now, it's the nation's eternal temporary passenger rail service that was created in 1971. Congress promised it would be self-sufficient in just a few years. 54 years later, Amtrak still exists, it still bleeds money, and still serves sandwiches that taste like they were rationed in Vietnam. But hey, at least you can drink a $13 Bud Light while the train breaks down outside Toledo. Now, we also can't forget Conrail, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, all of which are basically proof that the government's version of capitalism is the same as a guy who is drunk playing Monopoly. It's technically a free market, but somehow the bank keeps borrowing your hotels. So the biggest modern examples came during the financial crisis, because if there's one thing America loves more than individual liberty, it's preventing Goldman Sachs from crying. And also, yes, one of the former Goldman Sachs guys is now running Canada, but that is besides the point. So during the 2008 crash, the government bought 79.9% of AIG, it seized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and bailed out General Motors. Politicians called it saving the free market, which is a bit like calling CPR saving your independence from breathing. The Treasury ended up owning hundreds of billions in private assets, all while pretending that temporary ownership wasn't the same thing as nationalization. So now I've given you tons of examples in history of the US government essentially buying up or taking control of private companies. But here's what makes this current wave different. In every past instance, nationalization was reactive. The government stepped in because something broke. Railroads were bankrupt, miners were striking, or Wall Street was setting fire to itself while screaming, "Liquidity!" The motive was always, we have to fix this mess before society collapses. This time, though, the US government isn't reacting to a collapse. It's proactively buying stakes in industries that haven't failed yet, just so China can't dominate them. That is a massive shift. In 1917, America took over railroads because it couldn't move troops fast enough. In 2025, it's buying into Intel because it's afraid AI chips might give China better TikTok filters. Now that is a profound change. The government isn't fixing capitalism anymore, it's trying to weaponize it. This is corporate capture in reverse. Instead of lobbyists owning the government is starting to own the lobbyists. And it's really sneaky because these aren't full takeovers like the 1940s nationalizations. They're equity stakes. The US isn't waving flags and seizing factories, it's filing SEC paperwork and pretending to be a venture capitalist. America has figured out how to nationalize without admitting it's nationalizing. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of putting pineapple on pizza and calling it fusion cuisine. The difference also lies in ideology. The Roosevelt and Truman eras were defined by a belief that government could protect the people from corporate greed. The 2020s are defined by belief that government needs to protect corporations from China. The state isn't stepping in to regulate capital, it's becoming a shareholder because it wants to make sure capital stays American. And also what makes these different is that these don't seem to be temporary investments. The government doesn't plan to exit these investments quickly or maybe ever. They're setting up sovereign equity positions, meaning Washington is going to be sitting on these boards, collecting dividends and approving capital budgets like your least fun uncle. Essentially, we've gone from bailing out industries to owning them indefinitely. Now, the United States has always had this grand delusion that it's the cool older brother of the world, the one who got rich, moved out of his parents' basement, and now lectures everyone else about personal responsibility while still borrowing money from the same parents every Christmas. But lately, the US has started acting weird. You can feel it, like when someone starts dressing like their ex. Suddenly, America's wearing the same authoritarian cologne as China and insisting, no, I've always liked industrial policy. Trust me. Because now we're at the part where America has quietly realized that the only way to beat China in some areas is to become China. Not in the we'll take your social credit score and raise your patriot points card way, although maybe give that about 5 years, we'll see, but in the way that it's structuring its economy, through centralized control of key industries, strategic national investment, and what economists politely call coercive capitalism, and what normal people call, oh my god, are we communists now? But here's the thing, this new strategy didn't emerge out of nowhere. The US has been watching China's playbook. It's noticed that over the last 3 decades, China turned state ownership into a geopolitical weapon. While America was busy inventing TikTok dances, China was quietly turning entire sectors, steel, shipbuilding, energy, semiconductors, into disciplined national champions. Every Chinese CEO basically works for the government, every company can be commandeered at any moment, and every private sector innovation is one polite phone call away from being a military project. Meanwhile, the United States spent 40 years telling everyone the free market can handle it and will beat everyone. And well, it didn't. The free market built apps that let you put cat ears on your face, while China built the world's largest 5G network. The US outsourced its manufacturing to the same country it's now trying to outcompete, which is like training your rival's boxing coach and then being surprised when they knock you out in round 1. And now, suddenly, America is waking up to the fact that China controls the choke points of modern civilization. As mentioned, rare earths, China refines over 80% of them. Solar panels, China makes more than 70%. Pharmaceutical ingredients, well, over 90% of the ones the US medicine uses are imported from China, or India, which gets its raw materials from China. The Pentagon literally runs on Chinese minerals, which is the geopolitical equivalent of realizing your nuclear submarine runs on AAA batteries from Alibaba. It's a pretty terrifying thought, the world's most powerful military being held hostage by whoever controls the supply of magnets. And that's why America's freaking out. If China tomorrow decided to block rare earth exports, the entire US defense industry would collapse faster than a Tesla stock chart after an Elon Musk meme. Now, beneath all of this, all the patriotic rebranding is something much deeper and a little desperate. The US knows it's entering the late stage phase of its empire, the part where the empire stops inventing things and starts hoarding them. In the 1950s, America built highways, rockets, and computers. In the 2020s, it's building industrial policy PowerPoints. It's a country that once put a man on the moon and now subsidizes battery factories like it's buying indulgences from Saint Elon. So in a sense, the US isn't expanding its empire outward anymore. It's trying to wall it off. It's becoming like a fortress of capitalism, owning everything it fears losing, controlling everything it can't replace. And that tells you something about where America is psychologically. This isn't optimism, it's more anxiety. It's the global equivalent of buying canned food because you think the neighbors might come for your garden. And that's what makes this moment really weird. Because while America insists that this is a rebirth, it also looks suspiciously like panic management. Empires rarely notice when they're aging, but they all follow the same pattern. First they conquer, then they trade, then they regulate, then they start nationalizing stuff for security reasons. It's the imperial version of a midlife crisis. Rome did it, Britain did it, now America's doing it, only instead of nationalizing tea imports or spice routes, it's nationalizing semiconductors and lithium mines. And the most revealing part is how every justification for this comes wrapped in nationalism. Politicians aren't saying we're nationalizing industry, they're saying we're protecting American sovereignty. Which sounds inspiring until you remember that every empire in decline says that exact same thing. The British said it when they nationalized coal, the French said it when they nationalized Renault. Hell, even the Soviets said that when they nationalized everything. When a superpower starts justifying ownership of corporations in the name of strategic autonomy, it's usually because it's starting to lose strategic autonomy. However, as of the last year, the US is quietly reindustrializing a little bit. New semiconductor fabs are popping up in Arizona and Ohio. Rare earth refineries are opening up in Texas, lithium projects are advancing in Nevada, and all of it is happening under the umbrella of government ownership or subsidy. Essentially, America is trying to create their own version of the Chinese miracle, except instead of a billion disciplined workers, we have government contractors who bill $12,000 for a wrench. So what does the future of the American economy look like? Well, I don't think it will be pure capitalism or socialism, and to be honest, right now America is nowhere near socialist. But in the future, I think it'll be more of a capitalism with a security clearance. Factories run by contractors, innovation run by committees, and industries run by people who start their sentences with, "We cleared this with the Defense Department." It's just a little bit ironic. I mean, the country that once fought to keep the state out of the market is now building the most sophisticated form of economic centralization that the world's ever seen. And somehow everyone's just fine with this, because this time the central planner wears a stars and stripes tie and promises you that this is all in the name of good American freedom. Now, if you liked this video, please check out my documentaries playlist as I have a ton of other videos just like this on that playlist. So make sure to click on that, and I'll see you guys in my next video in just a few seconds.